Welcome to the ProfitLed podcast, where we discover proven growth strategies for bootstrapped entrepreneurs from the people who have done it before to help you accelerate your business. The ProfitLed podcast is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform, which could save you from doing the same webinar over and over again. From sales demos to onboarding to training, eWebinar turns any video into an interactive webinar that you can set on a recurring schedule or make available on demand, which means you can do hundreds of webinars without ever needing to actually be there to host them live. This podcast is a forum for the unsung heroes of SaaS, the founders and others behind bootstrapped startups who are creative and resourceful enough to forge a pathway to success. Here is where they get to share everything they learned along the way, so you can benefit from their experience and find success in your own ventures too.
Welcome to ProfitLed, the podcast for bootstrap entrepreneurs looking to make it happen. My name is Melissa Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. I wanted this podcast to feel less like an interview and more like a conversation, like the kind that you'd have with a friend at a bar. In fact, the guests that I look for are the kind of people I'd want to be friends with. And in some cases like today, they're actually my friend. These are not unicorns, not hypergrowth superstars, but founders who've struggled and succeeded to create a great business that make people's lives better every single day. There's so much content out there for VC-backed founders, but for bootstrap founders, not so much. In my mind, they are the real unsung heroes of SaaS. And as far as what I want for our listeners, I want to have tactical conversations that you guys can actually relate to. I want you to leave feeling motivated, energized, and ready to execute. So while it's utterly unrealistic for me to record this podcast in a bar, I thought at the very least I could have a drink with my guest virtually. So here we are today with my very special guest, Zvi Band, the founder of many things, which we're going to learn about. Hey, Zvi, how's it going?
Good, yourself, except it's 10 o'clock in the morning and I don't really drink anyways. I tried to last week for the first time. So I hope you don't mind if I don't have like a beer or anything like that with me.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a while since we've caught up, so I'm excited for today. As you know, I asked you to bring your favorite drink to enjoy while we chat today. So what'd you get?
The thing I drink the most these days is matcha. And so I happen to have a can of matcha latte. I usually make my own, but I ordered this like Taika stuff. I had a few more cans left. So that's what I'm drinking. It's got macadamia milk. And it wasn't until I got Taika did I learn that macadamia milk is in fact a thing.
Why is matcha your new thing?
I've never really gotten into coffee, and I think that's probably good. So I started drinking green tea, and it's like a caffeine kind of thing in the morning. I have felt really jittery. And at some point, someone said, hey, why don't you try matcha? Tasted it, love it. It's my favorite drink, not just in the mornings, but afternoons as well. Oftentimes, like when I'm traveling, the annoying thing I do is try and find a good place where I can get like a decent low sugar matcha. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the thing that's always available in my fridge.
Awesome. Well, I brought myself this mango sour from Oedipus, which is actually a brewery in Amsterdam where I am right now. And this is actually something I've had in my house for a while. I have no idea who brought it over. It's one of those drinks that I always put in the fridge before we have a party, hoping someone else would have it, because I have no idea how it tastes like, but they never take it. So I thought maybe that someone has to be me today. So I think this beer's time has come. Who knows? It might actually be good.
And I guess sour beer can only get more sour, right?
You know, I have no idea. It does have this fun packaging on here that says polyamory on the bottle, which is kind of like clever. Very, very Amsterdam, very, very Dutch. So I think it's time for some ASMR magic. I'm going to open my drink right now. You can too. Just do it in front of your mic.
All right. Let's see. How does this popping sound go? Oh, that was a good one.
All right. So I'm going to also pour it into this glass for sound effect. But I'm definitely making a mess because this is not how you should be pouring it. I guess the sound effect of this is not really working. There. Yeah, this is definitely not the right way to pour beer. I think it's just okay. It is a heat wave, so I'm grateful anyway. Well, cheers.
Cheers. Really happy to be with you. After exchanging so many messages asynchronous, I always value the chance to get to some one-on-one time with people I care about. I'm glad we could do that. Yeah, let's let other people listen in.
Awesome. Well, Zvi and I have known each other for, I want to say 7 or 8 years, since the beginning of my last startup. So we were both in real estate tech. We'd run into each other at conferences, and eventually it was almost like we had this like real estate founders support group, or maybe I should say like Fight Club because it sounds cooler. And Zvi's last company, Contactually, was acquired in 2019 for 8 figures. I invited him here today to share his story on building a venture scale company, the learnings he's had from that experience, and how he's actually applying those things to what he's doing today. So for the bootstrappers listening today, I hope by the end of this conversation, you'll have some clarity on what it means to hop on the venture train so you can decide if it's really right for you and your business. So Zvi, with that, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing right now?
Thanks for sharing. So I'm a software developer by trade, but learned very early on in my career that my relationships were my most important asset. And I can really look back, and even nowadays, the most transformational things in my life have come from the people I've known or the communities I've been part of. It's something that doesn't come naturally for me. I'm not naturally a very social person. I don't remember to follow up with people, etc. And so that's what led me to found Contactually back in 2011 as a CRM meant around relationships. As it happened to be, as we're building it up, we searched for initial market, we found real estate agents. And I would say, like, while we never really built a real estate CRM per se or real estate company, the product itself and the marketing became more and more attuned to real estate agents, which is why we grew to become one of the best respected CRMs in the real estate industry. We were acquired by Compass in 2019. We had raised around $12 million in venture capital over the years, starting from before we even had a company, we had an investment offer. And that was really the catalyst behind the company to join 500 startups, raise subsequent rounds of funding, and then exited in 2019. And I was there at the company that acquired us for a couple of years and then left in January 2021. And we can go at some point in terms of what I'm doing now, but I like to say I was an all-you-can-eat buffet of businesses I could do and things I get involved in. And like many do an all-you-can-eat buffet, you just put way too much on your plate.
So it sounds like you raised venture capital from day zero. I actually didn't know that. How did that come to happen? How did you just get an offer to take money and do something?
There's the how and the why. The how was I had been running my own consulting firm for a couple of years. And it was going great. I worked with a lot of startups and venture capital firms, etc. I was starting to get burnt out because I was kind of finding I was doing the same projects over and over again. And I wouldn't be able to see a project really through. You launch a company, launch an iPhone application, launch a WordPress site, and just kind of move on. So I knew I wanted to start a product. However, I really lacked the discipline to be able to say, hey, okay, 10% of my time or 5% of our revenue is going to be going towards building something new. I always fell victim to the short-term gains that you get from client work. And so I had started thinking about this idea of a proactive CRM behind Contactually and happened to meet a friend of mine who back then was a partner at 500 Startups, and he offered funding right on the spot for what we're building. I saw this as a burn the boats moment. This could be the thing that helps us not have to balance time between running a studio and building a startup. So great. At the same time, also myself and the two people who would go on to be co-founders of mine, it's not like we had tons of cash lying around. We had rents and all of us, were in the process of getting married and getting engaged and everything like that. So it's not like we could say, hey, we're going to go for 2 years without a salary. So that really got us started saying, hey, you know what? Venture capital is going to be the route that we take.
Mm-hmm. And I think you were the one who coined this term venture train for me. I want to dig into that a little bit because I remember you saying some years ago, we were at lunch and you said, hey, once you hop on the venture train, you can't get off. What does that mean?
I would clarify in hindsight, it's hard to get off, right? But let's just think about this, right? If you decide to bring in outside funding for a company, right? Those investors logically want a return. And therefore, in order to have a return, most returns in a technology company come from some kind of exit, right? Going public, IPO, or an acquisition or merger or something like that. So you're basically committing yourself to some kind of really great outcome versus, a bootstrap business, which could be a great lifestyle business per se that never returns, right? And obviously, again, there are different off-ramps that one can think about, but it does put you on the path that the moment you start raising money, you want to generate a return. Returns usually come from growth. Growth takes investment, of capital and time, which oftentimes exceeds what a company has on their balance sheet. So you raise more money. So sure enough, we And this is like largely my doing, but we got into a place where, okay, we raised a seed round. Okay, well, we want to make sure that we have a great exit. We're able to grow the company. That means we want to grow. Well, in order to grow, we need to spend more capital. And therefore, we start thinking about like the capital needs we need in the future. Okay, we're going to raise a Series A. What growth rate do we need to hit for a Series A? And then we start investing more in there. So that kind of had us in this mindset where everything was about growth. How do we grow this company? How do we become bigger? How do we invest further? Knowing that capital was needed in order to do that. So, okay, that's going to take more money for that.
Did you know that you were getting into that back then, like from that day zero capital?
No, to be honest. And I think this is largely just the mindset at the time. This was back in 2011 when we started the company, as well as my limited relationships of people who have raised venture capital or people who've bootstrapped. There's a lot more startup canon, like, this podcast, for example, that can speak to that. But I also credit like two things. One, we didn't really go into the company and start working as co-founders with a clear alignment on like, hey, what do we want this to be or where do we want this to go? And thus we fell into the second issue, which is, hey, if we're going to start a startup, well, a startup needs to raise capital in order to exist, right? And it was hard for us to even think about any other possible situations nowadays. And again, this is a trap that like I see too many people fall into nowadays where they think they need to raise money in order to be a startup, right? And they almost treat venture capital as like permission to build a company.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And I blame the media for this. I mean, I don't want to go on like too long of a rant, but like, I mean, being in the community, I think people listening would know what we're talking about here. And you built this business for 8 years. So as the business evolved and as you started to learn more of these things, talk to your peers, understand different forms of funding or even bootstrapping, did you always feel like raising venture capital, because I know you had to keep doing it as well, was the right decision?
It's a great question. And to be honest, a lot of my thinking has evolved post-acquisition and post-exit, where my co-founder and I were able to do a really deep postmortem. And I was able to do a lot of soul searching as to how we ran the business, how I operate as a leader, my mindset, and has really opened my eyes to that. But to be honest, there were times where we took a step back and saying, hey, is there a path for us to take more of a lower growth, less shoot the moon kind of attitude to the business? And our insight was like, hey, it's really hard to get off that train because we do have investors that we have made commitments to, that they've invested with that. We don't want to ignore that. They invested with the eye toward it being some kind of positive return for them, as we're able to end up generating, versus saying, hey, you know what? We're just not going to raise it. We'll figure out a way to pay you guys back at some point. That was a bit of a challenge. And so I would say, especially in later years, we were clearly so committed to what we had built that a hard left turn would have been a really, really hard left turn.
And what was that dream that you were selling to investors at the time? You keep talking about this exit that they wanted, but like, what was the size of that? Like, how did you quantify that for them to be able to say, okay, like we're going to take a bet into this team?
This is where we kind of came in with this mindset. This is again guided by startup canon at the time, and even nowadays, where investors don't want to invest in something that could be a 2 or 3x return, right? They're looking for 10, 20, 100x, right? And so when we came in, especially building a CRM platform, we were going with this idea that the CRM industry is going to be one of the biggest industries moving forward in terms of enterprise software, which it definitely is, but there's so much opportunity and so much unmet need. The right CRM for real estate agents or financial advisors, consultants or accountants. So we said, hey, we can be the CRM platform for millions, not try and like replace Salesforce per se, but that there's so much opportunity. And so we started thinking about that. And real estate, for example, was never meant to be the industry we're in. It was meant to just be the first industry we're in.
Did you believe that, like truly, authentically believe that? Or looking back, did you feel like that was a story you you had to tell because you were raising capital?
Knowing what I know now, if I were to start another business, and I actually did start a business very similar to what I had built before, I truly believe that there's so much unmet need for tools to help us manage relationships. There was so much potential behind what we're doing. I truly believed in that. And we also needed to believe in that. I needed to truly believe and internalize that, hey, we are onto a huge market opportunity. Otherwise, I could not authentically speak to investors about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you spoke about the times where you guys thought, hey, maybe we could just figure out different ways to pay you guys back, or maybe we should just opt for slow growth. Like, what was happening at those times that like made you think differently?
To be honest, again, I can be very upfront because this is all past history. It's unclear whether it was me as a founder back then, the company we built, the market, etc. But fundraising for us was never a walk in the park, right? It's not like I could just snap my fingers and, 6 investors would come to us with term sheets. Like we always had investor interest and everything like that, but it was by no means a walk in the park. Especially like when we were starting to raise later rounds, including like a Series B in 2015, 16, 17, et cetera, we started to say, hey, this is getting a little hard, right? We may not be able to pull this off. Is this the right path for us? Are we basically saying, hey, we either have to raise a Series B or bust? Frankly, even just at the time of we were selling the company, we were pursuing different options. We're like saying, hey, listen, we could sell the company. We could raise a round of venture capital. We could raise a round of private equity and buy out our investors and just kind of like be a relatively stable business. We could also say, hey, you know what? We're just going to focus purely on stability and profitability and then address how we pay back investors at some point later on. So we were evaluating all of those options. We ended up deciding for various reasons that, an acquisition was the absolute best thing for the market, our customers, our team, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, like as you built the business and as you actually have customers, reality is a very different reality, right? Than like as you were, dreaming it up or putting it on your deck. So what are some of the expectations that come with like building a venture scale company? Like we talk about like 10 times, but it's really more 100 times, right? Like that's the math. And there's lots of equations out there as to why VCs need this number. But what kind of expectations does that comes with that?
This is where things started to get rocky for us, right? Venture returns, right? And the biggest indicator towards the opportunity that you're building that leads to more hiring a great team, more capital infusions, it really does all come down to growth rate, right? There's obviously a lot of hype that can get associated with it too, but growth rate, right? So really everything in our business was centered around our growth rate, not growth, but our growth rate, right? So it's all about how do we acquire more customers? How do we retain them? How do we help them to expand? Which is okay, right? But that was the only thing that mattered, right? The biggest thing that mattered for us every quarter was what was our growth rate that's going to be this quarter and what do we have to do to hit that growth rate? There are obviously other things like margins and profitability, et cetera, but especially with our focus on growth at all costs, it was really growth at all costs. And one of those costs, frankly, was my own mental health, right? Everything in my life became centered around what do we need to do to get this company to grow? And not grow over a 5 or 10 year period, like grow over like a 3-month period, right? I really lived quarter to quarter. One of my joys these days is a quarter is able to roll over. I'd be like, oh, wow, I don't care, right? And It used to be like, know everything. I would check the chart and look at our sales pipeline and talk to our sales reps and saying, what do I need to do to to help us hit this growth rate? That set a lot of really bad habits for me.
And I also know that you did not start as a sales driven founder. So all of those things were kind of new to you as well, which I'm guessing added like an extra level of stress.
A little bit. To be honest, I would say I loved learning and becoming a sales focused founder. We started, I'm a software developer by trade. One could assume that the center of what we were building and everything about the company was really based on the product. To counterbalance that, we actually decided that the most important thing for us was our sales and marketing. And so I focused a lot of my time, frankly, more of my time on sales and marketing than I did on the own product I was passionate about. So that was actually a very, very welcome change that I loved. But I would say I probably wasn't necessarily the best at it. And one of our challenges, I would say, is that because we are so focused on quarter over quarter growth, similar to a lot of public companies these days, it became harder to invest in some of the long-term projects that may have been the best thing to focus on long-term, right? It became really challenging for us. And we were never able to pull it off in terms of investing time in R&D to move to a new market, right? Or there was a time in 2014 or 2015 where we had adopted this like move fast and break things mentality that like Facebook was popularized in the time. And sure enough, we moved very fast to build a lot of product and we broke a lot of things. If that were to happen to me nowadays, I'd be saying, cool, let's just say this. For the next year, we are not going to focus on growth. We are not going to focus on revenue at all. In fact, I would expect our revenue to go down. And the only thing that we're going to do is stabilize the product. That's it, right? We couldn't do that when there was focus on like, well, we got to make sure we're growing because we want to raise a round and investors are going to be looking at like the, what our growth rate over the past year has been. And so that put us in that very short-term mentality.
And that's the thing, right? Like when you take that size of a check from a venture capitalist, like it just seems really big. But at the same time, once you start spending on marketing, sales, hiring people, paying yourself, like you have to start thinking about the next round. Like, especially if you're operating in North America, that's just the reality of how much things cost. And I can only imagine those costs be much higher right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And where I really struggle, Melissa, and I think we've talked about this before, is in hindsight, I understand more and more about venture capital as a tool. And I think it's a great tool. It's one that many should use. But where I really struggled was my mindset around it. Because everything we mentioned, I felt that I had to grow the company at all costs. Otherwise, not only the business was going to be a failure and our team would be let down, but like I personally would be a failure. And so that put me into this survival mindset where literally everything in my life was built around how do we survive to get to the next stage of growth. And as I've learned, that is a terrible, terrible, terrible place to be at psychologically. And that does not lead to your best work at all.
And was that true, or was that a reality that you had painted? Like, was it true that if you didn't grow X% or kept that going for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, that you were just not going to raise capital? Or were you just so laser focused on that it became reality? Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
It's my perceived reality. So for example, I could have said, let's say back in 2014, hey, we need to really focus on improving the core of our product. Let's not focus on revenue growth. And we are just going to be absolutely laser focused on building out our new product and everything like that. As such, we're going to reduce the team and reduce burn down to like exactly what we need to do that. Maybe again, lay off salespeople or reduce the size of our team and ad spend, etc. And yeah, it may push out our raise by a year or so, but fine, we'll be able to take the capital. So we're able to take that longer term bet. So it's things like that I realized wow, if I had really taken a step back and approach this, let's say as a board member versus like the CEO who just needs to make this quarter's numbers, maybe we would have been in a better place.
If you didn't raise venture capital, would you have built your business differently?
Yes. And I actually have a blessing that I have the opportunity to really rebuild my business now. and I'm able to approach it very differently. That being said, again, I have to give, the Zvi in 2011 a little bit of forgiveness because I was 11 years younger back then. There's a lot I didn't understand, didn't know, didn't have access to. The world was very different in terms of knowledge and canon, and this podcast, for example, didn't exist. But having the opportunity now, I'm like, yes, absolutely. I don't need a 10-person support team. I need one person with the right skills. I don't need to have, 3 designers and 5 developers and a VP of product. I can have 2 really great engineers and give them very specific guidance and focus. I can take a lot longer time frame and saying, hey, I'm going to build an absolutely amazing product and then scale it. I feel I'm able to, in the second go around, I have enough scar tissue that I'm able to look back and saying, hey, how did I operate and what could I do better moving forward?
So you eventually had an 8-figure exit. I mean, that's awesome, right? Like most people don't have an exit. Was that the dream you sold to investors? And was it what you hoped for personally?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was, listen, it's positive return. Every investor made money. Would it have been better if we had a 9 or 10-figure exit? Absolutely, right? But especially for it being my kind of first real kind of go, I did consider success. I still look back at Contactually as 7.5 years of business school that I happened to get paid decently well for. And so for that reason, I did go in with that mindset that hey, listen, any kind of positive outcome is going to be great, right? And cared less about the size. Now, that being said, it's very hard because your ego starts to pop up and says, well, that person sold for 70 million. That person sold for 90 million. That guy's an idiot and sold for 150 million, right?
Yeah.
Definitely really had to make sure that I said, hey, you know what? I'm very proud of what we built and the team and everything like that. My ego is nothing here, and just be very happy that we're able to deliver something of real value.
Yeah. So how would you sum up that whole kind of 8 years experience of building a company, raising capital, pushing for growth and selling it now that you've had some time to think about it?
We did a lot of time postmortem. Like I said, I think the biggest way I frame it is 7.5 years of business school, because that put me in a mindset of okay, it's all about the learnings I got. And then how do I apply those learnings moving forward? And I learned a whole lot because it ended up being this great, and I wish I had invested in more, but in hindsight, it was a great laboratory to test out leadership styles, cultural design, how to hire people, how to build great product, how to not build great product. And so I literally have just a book of stuff that I've learned that I'm able to now take with me for the rest of my life.
And speaking of those things, what were the most important learnings from that experience and how are you applying that today?
So there are a few top ones. One, take care of yourself. I put myself in a physiological survival mindset. Right. And so, yeah, I tried to meditate here and there, and I had a coach and talked to a therapist once in a while or something like that. But really, as I mentioned, I went in just with this fear and scarcity mindset. And so I've committed now that in this next chapter of my life, I'm going to be focused on maintaining my personal, physical, mental, spiritual health, because otherwise I can't do my best work. It's not selfish. I just cannot serve the people and everything like that I want. The other one I would say is really taking a step back repeatedly and stepping outside of your business. And even if it's just asking yourself the right set of questions, one of the questions I use is that, hey, if they hired a CEO today, what would the CEO do? If I'm doing something different than that, it's worth asking that, because again, there's lots of things that we do because we'd done the week before, the day before, etc. And to take a step back and saying, hey, is what I'm doing the right thing? And if not, toss it immediately. And the other, there are other lessons in terms of cultural design, leadership styles. Leadership is something I've invested a lot into. I embrace a servant leadership mindset early on, which I think was great early on, but if you spend so much time serving the needs of others, you really don't give yourself any space to really identify what do you believe you should do? What do you believe the company should do? Are you taking care? Are you serving yourself? And it allowed me to say, hey, moving forward, how do I run my life? How do I run my businesses?
And how do you see venture capital now? I know you have a few businesses. You're always spinning up new things. Is that still capital that you would go after, or have you looked at other forms of funding, or are you thinking of bootstrapping?
I have 3 businesses right now. 2 are bootstrapped and have zero interest in raising outside capital for the foreseeable future, or at least dilutive capital in a way, right? Zero interest in doing that. The third, Camp Social. This is a big moonshot company, and we did start raising outside capital very early on because we believe that, hey, this needs the right funding in order to really achieve those heights. I see venture capital as a tool, but what I've come to accept more and more is that it's a tool that you can use. You don't have to. It's not like your startup doesn't exist without it, but you need to go in with the right mindset for it. And you may come to the decision that it is not the right thing to do. So for example, in all 3 of my businesses, the only capital I've raised is angel capital because I started to go down the venture capital route and I realized, wait a second, at this stage, not just in the company's progression, but in my own progression, like venture capital is not the right thing. And I'm very thankful that I had that early on learning experience, because otherwise I may have found myself being CEO of a venture-backed company and stuck in the same negative patterns that I was stuck in before. And while I have greater awareness, I wasn't necessarily fully prepared for it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening think, you mentioned earlier, like, oh, this is permission to build something, or this means I'm successful, or someone else has validated me. And we know that that's not necessarily true. And over the years, I've been doing this for 12 years now and speaking to a lot of venture-backed founders and non-venture-backed founders, like there's a reality that comes with the money. What would you say to people now, before they go out and raise venture capital? Like, what would you want them to know?
I would say that I would push them to do some really deep soul searching. And I've had this conversation many times, including for example, someone yesterday who they failed to raise more money and they're actually very thankful for it, as we end up talking about over an hour-long call. We are too often guided by our extrinsic motivation, right? Or by external signals, the startup in TechCrunch that just announced that they raised $50 million, or the person who's on stage because they raised $150 million, they hit $1 billion valuation. But intrinsically, if we are motivated more by happiness and joy, does that matter? Right. And I, as well as many others, have had the experience now of selling a company and making a decent profit. And don't get me wrong, there are changes in your life that happen, you're by having basic needs taken care of for some period of time. But I wouldn't say otherwise I'm that much happier than I was the day before the company sold. And so realize are you doing things because other people want you to, and because you're trying to feed your ego and status and everything like that? Or are you doing this from you truly believe in this? I got to the realization with one of my companies that, we may raise venture capital for at some point, is that, hey, if we do it, it's going to do because I truly believe in the potential behind this. And we're going to need a lot of outside capital in order to really fulfill that vision. And great, then go for it, right? But don't do it just because you want to be able to brag to friends that you got $1 billion valuation.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a right way or wrong way to build a business, but there certainly is a right way for you. And it takes, maybe you said soul searching or just awareness to know exactly, what you're getting into. And the thing that I hate the most is really media skewing our idea of success, making it seem like, hey, if we don't get written up on TechCrunch or chase the unicorn, then we're not ambitious enough or not worthy of success. But we know that's BS. There are so many different ways to build a company. And now different ways of, or different companies offering non-dilutive capital, as well, or maybe even going to angels or friends and family or, whatever that might be. So what advice do you have for founders who have already gotten on the venture train and actually just want to get off?
I would say and I would apply this even to people who are exploring starting a company or exploring what their next thing is. One of the most meaningful books in my life, and there are a number that I can recommend, is The Second Mountain, right? And that really speaks to it, by David Brooks. That really speaks to the underlying theme behind what we're talking about, which is what kind of life are we trying to build? Are we trying to build a life of status and ego and more money and more things? Or are we trying to live a life of purpose and mission and joy? What are we trying to do, and understanding the difference between those two? And you're right. We are guided by society to seek greater status, greater mission, bigger things, more stuff. You can't just have a Honda in the driveway. You have to have a Tesla in the driveway, right? raising at $1 billion valuation is much better than raising at a $50 million valuation, right? All these things, and really understanding, well, like inside, what does that person need, and do that. That's always my advice. And you may find yourself, hey, there's even a way to shift what I'm doing right now for that. So for example, if you find yourself, and this is something I've had a conversation with a few people now, I'm actually on the board of a couple companies that are going through similar transitions where the founder is evaluating like, hey, why am I here? Like, what is my purpose? Like, how do I find more joy in it? And it could just be something as simple as, deciding that like there's just a slightly different way to run our business or different mindset or mentality that I can have, up to the more extreme thing that, as we all know, like we are not shackled to these companies, right? We could walk away at any point in time, right? You could turn around to your board, right? Even if your board is like your other co-founder and saying, hey, I'm not the right person to lead this, right? Or if I am, there's some things that we have to do differently, right? No one's going to go after and sue you. Well, hopefully not, right? No one's going to have to sue you because like you decided, hey, this isn't the right job for you anymore. And then beyond that, it's really understanding, talking to other founders and really exploring what are the other angles, right? Could we have an honest conversation with our investors, right? Could we, figure out a way to pay them back? Or could we say, hey, you know what? Sorry, like, we tried to shoot the moon. We don't think that's going to happen. Here's option A, B, and C. We'd welcome your input. And, again, most good investors are like, hey, we get it, right? They're chasing the portfolio returns and they're not going to be too upset if it turns out that you're not able to really pull it off.
So what do you care about now? It's been a couple of years since you sold your business. You've started some new ones. Where's your head at?
My main focus is to really understand and live life on my second mountain. And meaning like pursuing projects that I believe the world needs and are within my zone of genius, my ikigai, which I very much believe in. So I'm very much focused on pursuing that, but doing it in a way that best serves me, right? So meaning not sacrificing myself and my family and happiness all for the pursuit of that mission. But for example, structuring my day how I want to, right? Structuring my teams how I want to. I, at the moment, don't want to have big teams because big teams require a lot of responsibility and constant one-on-ones and checking in and HR and all these things. I'm like, hey, that's not my focus right now, right? And so I want to make sure there's time for me to take care of myself. And my kids are 3 and 6, so I want to be there to pick them up in the afternoon and really enjoy life while still achieving these larger objectives.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same mind as thinking, coming to eWebinar, it's like, okay, how can I build a business around the life that I want to lead and not build my life around the business that I have? And certainly I feel like that's an earned luxury. And I feel very grateful that I have a second opportunity to do that. But for anyone listening, like you are the most important asset in your business. Right. So if you don't take care of you, like you can't do anything else.
I wish I'd kicked myself in the ass early on that like, hey, maybe dummy, like, those late nights and, aren't necessarily that great, right? Because you'd be a hot mess. And even just small mental tricks of changing, like I have to do something to, I get to do something can make a huge difference. And yeah, to your point, if you're not taking care of yourself, well, you're not able to take care of your business and customers and clients and team and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question, what are some final words of wisdom that you want to leave our listeners today who are bootstrap founders who are focusing on driving growth and profitability?
To be honest, and Andy Dunn, the founder of Bonobos, has this excellent article and really kind of captures the mindset. And just remember, it's all your fault. This applies to everyone, right? But especially founders who are at the top of the food chain in their various ventures. Just remember, it's all your fault. That if there's a problem, it is your fault, right? If something goes well, great, it's your fault too. But that also gives us permission to saying, oh, well, I'm in control of this moving forward. I'm not stuck in this mindset, right? If there's a toxic person in my team or toxic client, it's my fault they're still here and I can get rid of them immediately, right? If I don't like the way that we're operating things, I can change things right now if I want to, right? To the point where you can say, hey, I'm going to step out entirely, right? I very much try and embody that mindset and remind myself over and over again, hey, I'm not stuck here. I'm not chained to the company. This is my fault here. and I have the permission to be able to change it so I don't regret things.
Yeah, I love that. Especially toxic people. Like, you're always in control and you get to create, I guess, your own reality in a sense, right? Like, your startup is really your playground, and it can be a reality.
This is one of those minor things, by the way, just as a random aside, as we're closing. I've learned, for example, that, when we were focused so much on revenue, we had to keep every dollar of revenue possible, right? Which meant, we had to kiss a lot of frogs and retain a lot of customers that weren't the greatest. In this next venture, if I see a customer who's not treating my team appropriately or not treating me appropriately, they're gone. There's nothing more powerful than being able to hand back someone's money and saying, hey, we don't need you, right? Or if you're going to stick with us, you have to make sure that you're a responsible part of this team.
I love that. My LinkedIn post tomorrow is actually exactly about that, is the customer always right? And I don't think they are. Like, there is only one reason I've ever fired customers over, and that's disrespecting our team. It's just not worth it. Like, you need to also make your team feel valued. Like, if anyone is in our support being rude or being mean for any reason, like, I am the first person to hop in and I take over that conversation and I let them know it's not okay, and they can go somewhere else if they want to. But this is like, just because we are your vendor does not give you the right to talk to us in this way, because we actually show up every single day making this incredible product with amazing user experience. And we try to get back to you as soon as possible, because as a startup, like, that's how you win. But when somebody comes in and they think they own us, like, that's not okay.
Yep. Makes sense. I love it. Again, it's all your fault.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to ProfitLed and be notified of new episodes. Head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of this episode. Zvi, how can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing today? And maybe you even want to share something about Camp Social.
Luckily, there aren't too many Zvi bands in the world. So if you just go to zvi.band in your browser, or just search Zvi Band. I think I'm at Skivas on Twitter. Happy to connect. If you go to zvi.band/now, you could see everything I'm up to with Relatable, my personal CRM platform, GoodSphere, our training business, or Camp Social, our community platform.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today and sharing all that experience. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me and allowing me to share some hard-earned scars with the team.
Thanks for listening to ProfitLed. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the ProfitLed podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.